Hi, everyone. Welcome to our program. This is My Child Came Out to Me, Now What? So if a young person in your life comes out as LGBTQ+, it can be a very overwhelming experience. It might either completely catch you off guard, or maybe you kind of saw it coming, but you still have a lot of questions about how to support that child and what this means for your family. So today, we're hoping that we can kind of help you find your footing. I'll give you some guidelines for supporting your child while also taking care of your own needs, and also provide you with some resources to help you with this new part of your life. So my name is Teresa Miller. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a librarian with Prince George's County Memorial Library System, and I also lead the library's LGBTQ+ team.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Otts, and my pronouns are she and they, and I am the librarian 3 at the Greenbelt branch in Prince George's County Memorial Library System.
Hi, my name is Sandy Rains. I'm a parent, I'm a member of PFLAG, and I'm a GLSEN of Maryland board member. I'm also a proud mother of a trans male child.
So we have a couple ground rules we want to start out with. What we're going to do for this program is we're going to record the first half, which will be our presentation. And then the second half of our hour today will be for conversation and questions. So we'll stop the recording before that so that we're not compromising anyone's privacy. But while we present and then afterwards during discussion, we would like you to, approach us with curiosity. Write down any questions that you have during the presentation so we can talk about them together. And then while you're sharing, make sure you're using I statements and speaking out of your own experience instead of from generalizations. And respect your own boundaries and comfort level. There's no need to share more than you'd like. It's whatever you feel like is gonna do the most for you in that situation. And then also, return that respect to others by listening respectfully and respecting confidentiality.
Okay, well, we can get started by just going over some of the basics about, who is around in America right now. First of all, for anybody who's unsure, LGBTQ+ refers to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer or questioning, but there are more letters than that. There are intersex folks, asexual folks, pansexual folks, demisexual folks, and there are non-binary people who do not necessarily ascribe to either gender or ascribe to both gender. There are two-spirited people, but for the sake of brevity, we're just going to say LGBTQ+ and know that everybody in that spectrum of gender and sexuality is included. So the most recent poll showed that 5.3% of Americans identify as LGBTQ+, and of that subset of the population, about 2 million of them are youth. Now, we know that there's probably more LGBTQ folks than that, but these are people who have identified themselves as such. In terms of how many trans people there are in America, about 1.6 million people in America are trans. 18% of trans people are aged 13 to 17, which is about 300,000 teens. 75% of LGBTQ youth report discrimination due to their sexual orientation or gender identity, which is really disturbing. Unfortunately, 34% of them said that they were bullied at school, like in the building. And then 28% said that the bullying either happened or escalated to an online environment. And unfortunately, statistically, LGBTQ youth are at higher risk of homelessness. In fact, they're 120% more likely to be homeless than their cisgender heterosexual peers, what we call cishet. They're more likely to be food insecure. They have higher rates of substance abuse, including alcohol abuse, mental health issues, whether treated or untreated. They experience barriers to necessary health care. They're also at greater risk for sexual predation. And unfortunately, they are at greater risk of losing their battles with depression and taking their own lives. Next slide, please. So LGBTQ youth and mental health is the main reason I think why we're here. We're all here because we care about children and want them to thrive. But we should know what we're up against. So currently 45% of LGBTQ youth will consider suicide. 14% will actually make an attempt. And that's actually occurring one every 45 seconds in America, which is an alarming statistic. 48% of recently polled LGBTQ youth said that they needed mental health services, but could not access the care for whatever reason. Either there wasn't a provider or they were prevented from seeking care. Of those teens that were polled by the Trevor Project most recently, 73% suffered from anxiety, 58% suffered from depression. So of course, we want to know what is going to improve mental health in LGBTQ plus youth. The main two things are going to be their family's acceptance, their family's affirmation, three things, and their family's support. So safe space in schools is also something that LGBT youth have said that was very critical for improving their mental health situation. Respect for pronouns, being in a community that affirms their identity, and also seeing positive portrayals of LGBTQ plus elders in media.
I'm going to talk briefly about some of the needs of caregivers. And caregivers mean parents, guardians, and anyone in the personal lives of children. And when we're saying children, it's children of all ages. So the child first comes out, or they share their thoughts about coming out or thinking about it. It's important to know that usually this isn't the very first time they've thought about it. Depending on their age and circumstances, they may have done some significant amount of research. They could have done a whole lot of Googling on the internet. They could have been talking with friends. They could even start talking with some school counselors or the school GSA. They may have a whole bunch of information that you may not have at that point. This may or may not have been the first time you've had suspicions about their sexuality or their gender. But either way, it's common, very common, that your child is leaps and bounds ahead of on their journey than you are, that you're just starting and they're already a good couple steps beyond you. So it's important that you take a few good deep breaths, you stay calm and you listen. And you ask about their thoughts, their feelings, concerns, and their fears. And more will be talked about that in a few coming slides. Right now, I'll talk about you as the caregiver. Some of these children have even had some thoughts about what they want to do, what their journey will entail. And these steps may or may not be realistic. At the very beginning, you don't really want to go into much detail about that. You just want to listen, you want to take it in. You don't want to make any pronouncements. That might come back to haunt you and might put you in a bad spot with your child and be at ends with them. It might be a conflict. There's no need to do that now. That certainly won't help them and it won't help you. It won't help you in your journey. Let the child know that you're on this journey together. You'll figure it out, but there's still a lot to learn, a lot to know. It's very important that you understand that the pace is going to be different, that they may continue to be ahead. They may continue to be aligned, they may be behind you at times. And also their needs are going to be different and you need to separate out those needs. And your needs may be different from your child, other children in your family, other siblings, as well as grandparents and anyone else who is with the child and has time with them. So you want to take that into account and you want to think about this and find separate resources to identify and address those needs. There are lots of resources around now, more every day, just about. Certainly the past few years, they've been mushrooming. It's wonderful. There are podcasts, there are blogs, there's a variety of Facebook groups. There's also a variety of local support groups. There are a number of books and organizations, and we'll get into those and some of the resources at the end of this. There are also resources amongst various faith groups and religions, including Judaism, the Mormonism of the Church of Latter-day Saints, Catholics, and other faiths. You can also find counseling and family therapists who specialize in LGBTQ concerns. So you want to look for those that address your needs, your family's and other family members' needs. And as you're adjusting, and I'm going to say the word journey because the word journey is used a lot. As you're on your journey, you're adjusting and learning. You also have to remember you don't have to share everything with your child, and it's not their responsibility to educate you. Sometimes there's some difference here. It might put some undue stress on them, might be putting some undue stress on you. So sometimes you need to keep that separate. It's not necessarily their responsibility. They maybe want to be part of your journey, and that's wonderful. Be in communication and talk with them. They may want to be a part of coming out to others. They might not. You just need to talk and know what the options are and share and figure out what's best for you and what's best for your child. It also is very common that when there are multiple parents, that you're in different places. And this happens quite a bit. Sometimes it's just a little tiny different, sometimes it's pretty far apart. And that's not unusual. So it's something to recognize as you're going on this and you come out, not to be overly stressed and worried about it. But there are a variety of resources that are available to help guide you and all the parents and all the guardians and all the adults involved in the child's journey, and also help keep focus on the child and to keep going with the journey. And most important, as in so many things, communication is key. You have to keep talking and listening. You have to find the resources, sometimes support, to help you with talking and listening and help give you words and concepts. And we'll be talking about that more as we go through the continuing slides.
So next, we're going to talk about what your child needs from you in this moment. First and foremost, they need to know that without any doubt that they're not going to lose any of your love or any of the safety that that love provides. And they need to know that you believe them about what they tell you about themselves and that you respect what they know about themselves. And they also need to know that they have your support, that you have their back, and that they're not going to have to face all the things in front of them by themselves. That you'll be there with them. Here I have a quote from the Family Acceptance Project. They're a research, education, and policy center who specialize in the well-being of LGBTQ plus children and youth. And the data shows a strong correlation between LGBTQ young adults who report high levels of family support and acceptance of their queer identities, and that leads to higher levels of self-esteem, social support, and just general overall health compared to their LGBTQ plus peers who have low levels of support in the family. And those teens who experience the low levels of support are at a much higher risk of depression, substance abuse, and suicide ideation and attempts. So to show your support of their emotional needs, you need to make sure that your unconditional love for your child is being continually expressed, and that you're reassuring them that this new information about themselves isn't going to change anything about your love for them. And I do want to say with this to be careful about saying, sharing your love in a way that's like, I love you anyway, or I love you despite this new thing about yourself, that frames their identity as an obstacle that your love is able to overcome, because that still sets up this part of themselves as a problem. They need to know that you love every part of them. You love them, including this part of them, and that their identity, their new sexuality or gender identity is just a part of the wonderful person that they are that you love. You need to be speaking with and listening to your child about their identity, even when it's new things that throw you off guard or that seem new to you, whether that could be them sharing that they have a crush on someone of the same gender, or there's a new style of clothing that they want to try that's not what you're used to. Even if it throws you off, be there with them and get excited with them, instead of showing your concern if that's what you're feeling. If you do have those feelings, that's fine, you can process them, but do that on your own. Don't project that onto your child. And in that moment with them, make sure that they're feeling your support, and that you're able to share in those exciting moments with them, even if you're still just getting used to it and learning. And then make sure that you're supporting your child's LGBTQ plus identity practically, not just with words. So welcome their friends into your home, connect them with resources that affirm them. If they need new clothes to support a new form of gender presentation, take them shopping, and just show that you're invested in this part of their lives. You're not just like cautiously okay with it, but you're there with them in it. And have conversations about how they want their identity to impact how they interact with other people, how much they want other people to know. If they want this to just be public information for everybody, if they want to kind of take their time telling people about who they are, or maybe separate like family members versus school versus like church community, have those conversations and work out how you can support them in that coming out process. Also, speak up on LGBTQ plus issues, even if it's not directly about your child, but just broadly, let other people see your support for the queer community, and your child is going to notice that and feel that personal support too. Just overall, you need to be demonstrating that you are there with your child. They're opening themselves up to potential mistreatment by being out and by being LGBTQ plus, and they need to know that you are there with them in that experience, and they're not going to be experiencing it by themselves. And also, lastly, be sure to connect your child with an LGBTQ plus role model and mentor. For one thing, it demonstrates that you really are comfortable with members of the LGBTQ plus community and you trust them. But also, this aspect of someone's identity, you're not necessarily born and raised in a community that shares that experience with you. Whereas with like gender or race, most people are surrounded by people who have similar experiences as they grow up, but that's not necessarily true for LGBTQ plus identities. So your child is going to need to connect with people who do share those experiences and can provide insight, show what life might look like, give advice, all of those things. There are also definitely things that you want to avoid doing that will have a negative impact on your kid. Distancing them from the community and from LGBTQ plus resources will be incredibly isolating and harmful for your child. Forcing them to keep their identity a secret from others. This can come from a place of wanting to protect your child from potential mistreatment. But what it really does is reinforce that this is something that they need to be ashamed of, and that you're not ready to support them in. You want them to hide that part of themselves from other people. So, and this also can be from a place of like not wanting to have conversations yourself with your peers. Your community might see your child being open about themselves and then turn to you and ask you to, make a statement that you might not feel ready to make about what you support. But your child needs to come first in that situation. They need to know that you are ready to speak up for them and for who they are. So asking them to hide themselves is a misguided way to avoid pain for your child, and instead need to be stepping up and keeping them safe as they're out and honest about themselves. And also definitely if you are continuing to hold harmful views or stereotypes about the LGBTQ plus community, that is going to impact your relationship with your child as well. They can't be the exception to your overall views. If you find that you do still have some harmful ideas about the LGBTQ plus community, set aside time and spend time relearning things, educating yourself, do self-reflection to unlearn those things instead of just trying to let your child be like one of the good ones or an exception to otherwise harmful views.
So remembering that your child is going to have, in many ways, the same social needs as every other child, but also it'll be unique. As Teresa mentioned before, they may not share the same exact everyday experiences as their cishet peers. So thinking of things, it's hard enough to deal with teenagers, of course, because they're finding themselves and their brains are still growing, but there are some tried and true things that we can focus on. So number one would be family. Sincerity, knowing that you have a genuine heart and an earnest place that you're coming from in terms of your support for your child. Interest, continuing to be interested in what are their hobbies, what music are they listening to, what video games do they like, are they into art or anime, who do they have a crush on, who do they admire, just like any child. And of course, genuine love. They're still going to need the love and affection from their parents that is so valuable to them. Every child is looking for that, and your child is certainly no different. Even if they are adolescent, pushing you away, it's still important to know that that love is steadfast. I think that school, of course, is still such a huge part of their life. So their social lives at school sometimes can be challenging, sometimes can be joyous. So thinking about that they need to connect with their peers, you want to make sure that your child doesn't isolate themselves too much, that they're continuing to interact with people who are or are around their own age. And that also goes with dealing with authority figures like teachers and administrators, anybody who could be in a mentoring role, who is their elder, making sure that they're having positive interactions with authorities, and then also advocating for safe spaces for your child. So for example, many middle and high schools have a GSA. When I was a child, it was called the Gay Straight Alliance. Now it's often known as the Gender and Sexuality Alliance. And we have found in our research that GSAs have really dried up during the pandemic, but they have a huge, huge impact on student success, mental health, and well-being. I would urge you to find out whether or not your child's school has a GSA, and if they don't, perhaps identifying authorities or peers in your child's school who would be interested in getting a GSA together. So that benefits not just your child, but other children as well. In terms of culture, we want to make sure that they're able to have access to representation. We know that that's something that teens are literally telling us, hey, when I see LGBTQ elders positively represented in the media, it brings me joy, it brings me affirmation, it doesn't make me feel bad. So being open to them exploring different representation in media. In terms of history is something that is very important to us in terms of being a human birthright. But there are some histories that have been suppressed or even erased. And LGBTQ history is now starting to see a renaissance of people being interested in it, people going back and collecting the data, because queer people have always been here for as long as humans have been alive. And that has been documented at times and at times not documented or erased. So your child may need assistance from you, and that's where librarians like myself and Teresa can come in really handy. Is if you are looking to know more about LGBTQ history and culture, we can help your child to connect with that in a meaningful way and in a way that will be engaging for them. And then of course, positive examples of media. as a child of the 90s, I can tell you that most LGBTQ representation that I encountered was about gay problems or something that was traumatic. So positive examples in the media are really important, and there are a lot of wonderful LGBTQ affirming cartoons, movies, television shows that are out there. So if your child is interested in media, again, that's something that librarians are ready and willing to help you with. And then lastly, of course, is just helping your child connect to the wider community, because ultimately we all want our children to be productive, happy members of society. So encouraging hobbies and sports, which can be tricky, especially I'm sure you've seen in the news that trans students have found some difficulty with being able to participate in sports. So just learning more about what your schools or your township stance is and advocating for your child. Looking for affirming spaces, so spaces where they can interact with other LGBTQ community or allies. Maybe travel and take them to a Pride event, whether it's something that's low key, like our Pride event that we have for families in the library, or whether you want to take the metro in and go to Capitol Pride. It's kind of up to you. And then of course, religious and spiritual inclusion. I know for many, many Americans, this is one of the dearest parts of their life. It's something that's handed down from generations, and some place where they feel communion and peace. And if that's something that you want your child to be involved in, it is certainly a great idea to if you are not in an environment, religious or spiritual environment, that is affirming and positive for LGBTQ youth, that you perhaps explore what institutions that are out there are, and there are quite a number of churches in our area, and temples, mosques that are actually open to embracing LGBTQ youth where they are, as opposed to trying to change or fix them.
There we go. So we want to give you just a quick little like LGBTQ plus 101 in case this is all like very, very new for you. We don't want to leave you hanging. So a quick breakdown of some of the larger concepts that are relevant across different LGBTQ plus identities, and just like the language that we use to talk about them. So when we talk about gender, we're referring to a broad cultural idea of what a gender is. So what a man is, what masculinity is, what a woman is, what femininity is. It consists of social roles, behaviors, interests, sometimes includes generalizations about physical appearance, but it's that shared social idea of man or woman. And then gender identity is like the personal experience that we have with that broader concept. So it's our inner understanding of who we are, whether that's man or woman or both or neither. And that includes how we present ourselves, how we want people to refer to us. And then biological sex refers strictly to anatomical, physiological, and genetic attributes. People often make the mistake of conflating this with gender, as if the genitals you have is the same thing as your entire social experience. But really, it's a very narrow part of who you are. It also is often simplified into just the genitals that you have or the chromosomes that you have. It's actually much more complicated than that, and I won't drag you through all of that. But it's generally, if you're talking about someone just conversationally, what you're talking about their identity is more likely to be about gender than about their biological sex. And then cisgender might be a new term to you. It's really just the opposite of transgender. It means that whatever gender was assigned to you when doctors saw you when you were born, they decided that based on the body that they saw, you were one thing, whether that's a boy or a girl or intersex. And then that whatever gender identity they put on you at that point has felt fine for you your whole life, and you still identify with that. So it's not a derogatory term by any means. It's really just a word so that we have something that's opposite of transgender. Transgender means you don't identify with the gender you were given when you were born. Cisgender means that you do. And then sexual orientation is the attraction that you feel towards people or don't feel towards people. It's not directly tied to your gender necessarily. And it's not even necessarily tied to biological sex. It just depends on people's own experience with their sexual attraction. But everyone has one, whether you're straight or bisexual, gay, lesbian, or asexual, or somewhere in between those. Everyone has a sexual orientation. So this image here is just a helpful map of these concepts. So you can see gender identity is this internal understanding of who you are up here. It could be the charts here on the right are kind of like a way to map it out if you wanted to use this diagram for yourself. It can be my understanding of myself is entirely woman and not man at all, not other at all. Or it could be it's mostly women, a little bit other, sometimes a little bit. You can fall anywhere on these spectrums for your internal understanding of your gender. Gender expression is the outward presentation. So it can include your clothing, it can include physical characteristics, it could be hairstyle, it could be grooming habits, but the way you want people to see you, the way you want to feel when you get dressed or groom, and also how you want people to respond to you. Your sex assigned at birth is just kind of the physical facts. And then physical attraction and emotional attraction. They're both tied to your sexuality, although here they're divided because it's a helpful way to discuss attraction. Some people might be physically attracted to all genders, but only feel emotional attraction towards one. There are also some terms you're going to want to avoid. This is a common roadblock for people who are feeling ready to have conversations about gender and sexuality, but are worried about using outdated language, or worried that the words they grew up hearing may not be appropriate. So some things to avoid: homosexual at this point is a pretty dated term to use. Most of the contexts in which it's still used are in a derogatory sense and are used to kind of present same gender attraction as disordered or some kind of disease. So it's much better to use more specific identity labels like gay or lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, etc. Transsexual is an outdated term. You would want to use transgender instead. Historically, the move away from transsexual was just to try to distance the idea of being transgender away from your physical characteristics and more into like your more complete gendered experience. There are still some transgender elders that use the term transsexual because it's a term they used when they were younger. But as someone who isn't transgender, you shouldn't be using the term transsexual unless someone has specifically told you that's what they want you to use for them. The terms transvestite and crossdresser, generally I would say stay away from. Transvestite, stay away from. It's outdated and offensive at this point. Crossdresser is an updated term for it, but it's not the same as being transgender. It's a different form of gendered expression. So generally stay away from using that one for transgender people, and also for young children who are exploring different ways of dressing. Crossdresser wouldn't be the appropriate term there either. Phrases like transgenders, a transgender, these are all incorrect. Transgender is not an object or a thing, it's a description. So you wouldn't say he's a transgender. You would say he is a transgender man or he is a transgender person. And for transgendered, that again isn't actually a word. The term would be transitioned, a gender transition. Sometimes also you can shorten this to just trans instead of transgender. So he is trans, he is transgender, either of those would be okay. On a related note, I didn't include this word on the slide because it is a highly offensive slur, but the word is tranny. You might have heard that word thrown around. It is not appropriate to use. It is a term that some transgender people reclaim for themselves, and that's their right, but it's not one that any cisgender person should be using. The phrases born a man or biologically female, those types of phrasing things imply that someone is essentially a different gender than who they are and who they say they are. It reduces them to the physical traits they were born with instead of their actual lived identity. So just refer to their real gender. You don't need to say born as this or that. Just call them a boy or a girl or a woman or a person. There are sometimes situations where birth sex is relevant. They're rare. Most of the time in conversation where you might feel the impulse to use these terms, just using their gender is more appropriate. But if you do need to refer to someone's sex, you can use the term assigned male or female at birth or designated male or female at birth. And then finally, identifies as a certain gender, again, kind of invalidates someone's gender identity by implying that it's just a choice that they made. You wouldn't say that a cisgender woman identifies as a woman because she just is a woman, and that goes for a transgender woman as well. And preferred pronouns is a similar implication that someone's pronouns, which we'll get more into pronouns in a second, but implying that the pronouns they use, she, her, they, them, he, his, are just like a personal preference and not a big deal, when it really is very closely tied to who they are and the respect that they deserve. If there are other terms you're wondering about, feel free to write them down and we can talk about them after the presentation as well. So about pronouns, pronouns are something that most cisgender people tend to take for granted because we're just used to people correctly assuming what gender we are, calling us by the appropriate pronouns, and it fitting us just fine and not having to worry about it. So it can kind of feel like people are making a big deal out of it if you're not used to having to think about pronouns closely. But for someone who is using pronouns that they haven't been using their whole life, that people haven't been assuming work for them their whole lives, using the correct pronouns is incredibly important because it is a way of showing respect for who they are and who they say they are, saying that we believe what you know about yourself and we will respect that, and also saying that the way you interact with the world and me as someone you're talking with should be affirming of who you are and who you know you are. So here we have a chart of some common pronouns she and her, most likely you're already very familiar with. They, them pronouns might feel a little new. Sometimes people who aren't used to using this to refer to an individual can get a little tripped up. But it's actually a lot more natural than you might expect to use they, them pronouns. If you say you're talking about a new doctor and you don't know their gender, so you say, like, when we arrive at their office, like you're probably more used to it than you think you are. You're just getting tripped up because you have to think about it now. So just take some time to practice it. Don't second guess your grammatic instincts because they're probably right on that one. Here at the bottom is one example of a neopronoun. These are pronouns that don't exist in other parts of speech as much as she, he, and they. And they're often very individual to the person who uses them. So if you meet someone who asks you to use these pronouns that you're not used to, just do some research on it, learn the different forms and practice. And of course, getting pronouns wrong is going to happen at first. Adjusting how you refer to someone that you've known for 10, 15, 20 years is a big change to make. So if you do catch yourself saying or thinking the wrong pronouns, I recommend just every time that happens, doing a little exercise where you say, like, oh, I accidentally said he instead of they, and then say 3 sentences in your mind to reaffirm that pronoun. They are my child. I love them. Their favorite thing to do is this. This thing makes them smile. This is something that they are really good at. Just give yourself those examples. If they're using a new name, work that name into those examples as well, just to help internalize and personalize that new way of speaking about them.
This leads us into talking a bit more about misgendering and dead naming. And misgendering is when someone refers to another person in pronouns other than the person has for themselves. Sometimes it is when someone has transitioned. Sometimes it's when someone presents themselves in a way that is different than what is presumed by their parents, what their gender would be. So it's just a misgendering. And dead naming is when someone has changed their name to reflect the gender. Usually this is when they've transitioned to reflect the gender that they are, and they have a name associated with that gender, or just a new name. So it's not associated with their former gender. And that's called dead naming. And that's an appropriate term. But as a parent, I know that many parents, we don't like that term just because I think it's just because it has dead associated with your child, just the word dead in there. And we as parents, we have a little heightened anxiety about our children and their safety. So some parents don't like that name, that word, although it's perfectly appropriate. Some parents use given name or birth name or some other term, but it's perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a kind of a gut reaction that many parents have. So why is it important that we're talking about this? It's incredibly important because, as we've heard, that we're using someone's appropriate pronouns and their appropriate name is associated with improved mental and emotional wellness. It makes sense that not using those would lead to the opposite, in so much that their new name is validating and affirming for someone. Using their former name is invalidating of their identity, and it's emotionally hurtful. You're telling them that you don't see them as their true self, and as many say, their authentic self. That's often used with transgender terminology, saying your authentic self. Instead, you see them how you choose to, which is not in alignment with who they are. Dead naming someone, even when it's accidental, can bring up their negative life experiences. It can be triggering. It can help. It can force them to deal emotionally with some of the trauma that's been associated with transitioning and with being their former selves. And even if they're prepared to deal with the trauma, it's no reason to give them reason to do it. Dead naming is to one person telling them they have the option to view them however they choose, rather than respecting your identity. You're taking ownership of the other person, not giving them the respect they need to define themselves. It's incredibly disrespectful, even when it's unintentional. But we make mistakes, and we all do. Everybody does. And even our transgender children and siblings and friends make mistakes too. We all make mistakes. So the important part is to keep it simple. You want to apologize, correct, and move on. You don't want to make too big deal about it. It recenters it from being about the child onto your own guilt. And often it gives that other person the responsibility to understand, forgive you. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You have to give me time. It's a new thing for me. That's just too much. You just say, sorry, Rebecca, I'll use Rebecca, Rebecca, and you just keep going. And that tip that Teresa was saying about practicing is very important. You want to keep practicing and keep saying it, using it in conversation. You don't want to make the other person's burden when you make a mistake. And you want to share when someone corrects you, you just want to say, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for trusting me with your authentic self, and I'm learning. And you move on, But what happens when other people do it? That can be a different situation when other people do it, and other people make a mistake. Whether the transgender LGBTQ person is there or not there, what do you do about it? So you want to do the same kind of thing. You want to correct it in the moment and move on. You want to do a simple correction. What I often do, what is often done, is I will just take the next statement, and in my mind, I'm thinking I will reframe it to use the correct pronoun or the correct name. And often that person say, oh, I used the wrong pronoun. Yes, you did. And kind of keep going if you can. If they're hostile to it, if they want to keep talking about it, again, if the person's there, you want to take it back and just keep moving along. If the person's not there, I see it as an opportunity to educate, to help them understand what's going on. Sometimes it's hard to know if it's hostility or a mistake or what's called a microaggression. And you may have heard that term. That's something it's not a new term, but it's just being used more so now. It actually was first used in 1970 by Chester Pierce, a Black Harvard psychiatrist, in relation to the many different forms of racism, everyday slights, snubs, and assumptions that Black people faced. So in the years since, the concept was applied to other marginalized communities, other folks of color, to women in society, those with disabilities, and of course, the LGBT community and other marginalized groups. And they do have negative impact. Often there are people who are kind-hearted and they don't really know they're perpetuating a microaggression. Sometimes they're very subtle. They don't always recognize it. They don't always recognize the harm it's done. But they don't always know the appropriate ways to express support. They might be using outdated term or a term that's harmful, or with using the correct language. And what do you do about it? Do you confront it? That depends on circumstances. There's no right or wrong with that. It depends on how the safety at the time, if you have the time to do it, the person, you can kind of gauge where they're coming from. They're not always prepared for the level of hostility that they're projecting, but it depends on a variety of factors. You just want to take it back to the child and what's important to the child, and not necessarily what that person believes, because it's not about them, it's about the child. I do see it as a way you want to educate. You want to ask them about, what do you mean by that? Why do you say that? Try to get, because you might come to hear something from that's a wrong assumption, that they have the wrong data. And you can use this time to share your experiences, to share correct data, and talk about resources and offer things. So I've always said, I'd rather have a stupid question and hear a stupid question or heartful question than not a question. Because if you don't hear it, because when somebody say, can I ask you a question about each other? And I'll kind of gird myself a little bit and say, okay. But we talk about it. I had that recently with my sister, who said, talking about with friends who knew my child previously, as I would say, the 1.0 version versus the 2.0 version, the 1.0 version, and would ask, and they often would ask the question about the genitalia and surgery and medical options, which the quick answer is always, that's personal, it's medical, and we're not going to discuss it, which is my sister would say. And I said, and she would be angry about it. And I said, sometimes if it's not, depending on the person and the circumstance, will say that, but I usually will go into why that's not a necessary question. I'll talk about the different types of transitions in social, legal, medical, and what it means and why the person doesn't have to do all of them and the different variety. So I use it as a time to educate. I've always had much rather have a stupid question than no question at all, because then I know what they're thinking. And next slide, please. Which brings us to talking about resources. I've mentioned resources over and over again. I want to go to the second one, GLSEN, and there's GLSEN Maryland. GLSEN Maryland, because Teresa before was talking about, was Rebecca, talking about the GSAs, the Gay Student Alliance, or the Gender Spectrum Alliance, or Gender Sexuality Alliance, or sometimes they're having different names now. GLSEN does offer resources and facilitates the GSAs in Maryland and across the country. So that is something GLSEN can help with, and you can go to the website and get information. PFLAG stands for Parents of Family of Lesbian Gays. We just say PFLAG, and that's an organization that is specifically for parents and families. And there's a lot of resources. There's written information. If you go to the website and you go to the store, you can order for $5 lovely brochures, or you can download them as PDFs and print and share them. And those are wonderful when you have a family member with questions, when you're in a coming out process to family members, to others, is to share those resources, as well as to schools or anything else. Tremendous resources. They also have the parent support networks, the parent support groups in various areas. I know there's one in suburban Maryland. Howard County PFLAG has a number of more local ones. I go to one, Baltimore County. It's a chapter of Howard County, or it's not chapter of, it's a part of the Howard County PFLAG, but it's located in Baltimore County. Baltimore City also has their own. Going down the very bottom of the list, there's now a group for affirming Black families, but I think it's BLAQ, because I think they brought in the Q instead of, you'll say, yeah, email address, the Q to come in with the queer questioning. So that was how, and that's a new group. PFLAG, quite honestly, is very white, not entirely, but very. Great resources, great organization, wonderful. But this is a new group that's for parents. Straight for Equality also has tremendous amount of resources. The Trevor Project on their website is very instrumental, especially with mental health resources. Gender Spectrum also runs conferences. They're based on the West Coast, but a lot of great information for families and providers. There's a new sports, or is it called Unrestricted Access? That's in the Baltimore City area, Baltimore area, for sports league for LGBTQ individuals, because that can be uncomfortable situations, as well as the partnership and bonding and the networking, which is lovely and wonderful. The CDC has wonderful resources, health resources. In Maryland, Chase Brexton, which is now on the list, CHASE, Brexton, BREXTON, and Johns Hopkins has a transition clinic. I'm not sure it's in the DC area. Great medical care. I know that there's outposts of Chase Brexton in Columbia that people can access. And they have all kinds of psychiatric care, mental health care, medical care. The premier pediatric oncologist in the East Coast is at Chase Brexton. And Trans Maryland is great for legal assistance. as well as other assistance, some of the process with being transgender in Maryland. There's also an organization called itsgetbetter.org. That's for all of those in the spectrum. It's for kids to help them feeling it gets better with going through and as the mental health aspect and the stress and anxiety on young people. And there's also the Trans Family Support Services, which is, as it says, it's an organization for support for families. And thank you, Rebecca, for putting those in the chat.
Teresa, we can't hear you for some reason. I'm sorry.
Okay, that should be better.
Yep.
All right, we have some resources for you here at PGCMLS also. The link on the screen and also the QR code will take you to the full list, but this is a book list specifically for parents and teens, but it will be helpful for younger people also who are just stepping into exploring this as a family. So this top one here is a great one to pass around to family members or friends who need a helpful introduction to queer and trans identities. The second one here is a much more extensive guide to health needs, and particularly sexual health needs, that if you are a straight cisgendered adult, you might not have this information that your teen needs. And there's more resources on the list here.
From Prince George's County Memorial Library System, we do have a dedicated heritage hub for the LGBTQ plus community. And that is on our website /pride. So please feel free to use that as a jumping off point to explore things with your child. If you are looking for some rainbow reads for thriving children, we have compiled a quick list, because there are just so many, of picture books, middle and upper elementary books, and then also high school student books. You can find that full list as a deck of slides that show you the cover, so you know what to look for, as well as the author, and at times certain awards that it may have won if you follow the shortened URL or click on the QR code.
All right, thank you for joining us. I'm going to end the recording, and then we can take a few minutes. We went longer than we planned to, but we can take a few minutes for discussion if that's wanted. Give me 1 minute for the recording.